Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to have all our panelists complete. I'll just like to give it 2 minutes to have all the attendees join us because that number is steadily increasing. So bear with us for 2 minutes and then we'll kick off. Well, good morning, everyone. I think we should start. People are still coming in, but I'm very happy to have today's panelists with us, and I'm sure they have a very busy day, so I would not like to further delay. So we'll start our webinar, Funding European Digital Media, Opportunities in the DSA and the DMA. My name is Wout van Wijk. I'm the Executive Director at News Media Europe. And it's a real pleasure to have you all with us today. We've had about 170, 180 registrations for a promising discussion on what is now one of the hottest topics in Brussels when it comes to digital regulation. And I therefore wish to very warmly welcome all of our speakers who have so kindly accepted to join us today. For what will probably be the first of several debates on the DSA and the DMA that we'll organize here at News Media Europe. For those of you who are not familiar with us, News Media Europe is a trade association representing the progressive news media industry in Europe. And we work with around 2,500 news brands across the Union. That is in print and online, but also radio and television, all in the business of journalism. So we had this idea of putting together this webinar because we think it is extremely timely, obviously, to have this debate in an open and inclusive manner on the issues that the DSA and the DMA seek to tackle. And the reason for that is really the idea, the realization that the DSA and the DMA are not just about content moderation and antitrust. We think it's about much more than that, and that it is really about our digital, cultural, and democratic sovereignty. And it is about what kind of society we would like to be and what digital products and services of tomorrow should look like. But it's also about, and of course this is particularly important to our sector, the news media sector, is how the notion of media freedom fits in there, both from a political as well from an economic point of view. And how do we ensure that in this increasingly complex online environment, journalistic freedoms remain protected, the models behind business, the business of news, continue to deliver, and how can we ensure that European citizens can continue to rely on high quality professional journalism. Now, before giving our first speaker, Alex Fanta, the floor for his keynote to help set the scene for our panelists, I have some housekeeping. The webinar should run till around 1 o'clock. We will take questions from the audience to be answered during the second part of the panel. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box, which you'll find on the bottom of your screen, I believe. We have disabled the chat to ensure that everything goes through one channel, which is the Q&A box. Please follow us on Twitter, newsmedia, @newsmediaeu, if you don't already. So we'll start with a keynote by Alex Fanta. And after that, I'm very excited to do a panel discussion with 4 very distinguished speakers. Dace Melbarde, member of the European Parliament, Christel Schaldemose, also member of the European Parliament. We have Havlík from the Czech government with us, and we have Ricardo Castanheira from the Portuguese presidency with us. First, Alex for a keynote, then we'll do the panel. Alex is a journalist with Netzpolitik, providing leading coverage on EU digital policy and regulation, and who also conducts important research on large technology companies. I believe Alex has some slides that I can ask him now to share, and the floor is yours, Alex.
Super, excellent. Thanks a lot. So as I was already kindly introduced, my name is Alexander Fanta. I'm a journalist. I write about tech and digital policy, and one topic I have covered extensively is the relationship between the publishing industry and big tech platforms. And I would like to put what the EU is doing in regards to helping journalism to sustainable business models in contrast with what the big tech platforms have been doing, because they have been also doing journalism funding. And I will say a little bit about some research we did last year, and then move to what the European Union is doing in this regard. Let me show you my first slide. Last year, together with my colleague Ingo Dachwitz, I co-wrote a study called Google, the Media Patron. It deals with Google's innovation funding for European media over the past years, mainly through the Digital News Initiative. Our study was co-funded by the Otto Brenner Foundation Germany and the German Trade Union Federation. It looks at Google's patronage, but also it's the broader connection between media in Germany and big tech. We built a data set of projects that Google funded through the DNI. We also did interviews with 25 publishing managers and journalists who were involved or who cover Google. Let me tell you something about what we found. One key finding of our study is that news media in Germany have a massive funding gap for innovation in their products. I think this is probably not news to anyone who's listening. The news industry is rapidly changing. Many media organizations are pivoting from an advertising-driven business model to other revenue sources, including subscriptions. However, it is clear that this form of innovation costs. The 150 million euro fund that Google created as part of the Digital News Initiative helps to finance new paywalls for media organizations, new formats to attract readers, such as newsletters, podcasts, or data visualization tools, and a lot of other stuff over the past couple of years. What was surprising to us when we talked to German publishers is that even managers from large, well-established houses said that they had trouble financing innovation projects. This is especially true for speculative ventures where the payoff was not assured. So anything where you don't know if it is gonna kind of benefit the brand or not. Here are 2 typical quotes from anonymous interviews we did. One of the managers said, well, we wouldn't have done it otherwise because we simply can't afford it. I think that is a picture, at least for parts of the news industry, where the leeway for moving into a transforming the business model is very short. Here is a quick look at what type of innovation Google has been funding by and large. From our taxonomy, you can see that a plurality of projects deal with automating content or building new data analysis tools. Another big chunk is a new format such as podcasts, visualization, video tools, augmented reality or virtual reality, and so forth. Less than a fifth of projects are intended to generate revenue. These projects focus mostly on subscription, membership or events, not on advertising, which is Google's core business. I think that is quite ominous, especially as many people credit Google with monopolizing the digital advertising market. Let me also quickly explain how Google's generous funding for the media came about. Google was the first tech company to directly address the funding gap of news media in Europe. One reason is that about a decade ago, they were also accused of having created this funding gap in the first place. This picture shows the agreement signed between President Hollande of France and Google CEO Eric Schmidt at the time to voluntarily give 60 million euro to publishers in France to help improve its reputation. In 2013, Google set up a fund in France to help pay for innovative tools for the publishers. Coincidentally, this was shortly after French publishers pressured the government to consider a new tax on digital advertising. This tax would have mainly affected Google. Now to move on to what more holistically Google has done over the past years, who they have funded especially. So the initial 60 million in France became a template for a European-wide initiative. In 2015, Google pledged 150 million euro to European publishers, big and small, but mainly big in the digital news initiative. Here's a table of where the money went to. What you can see is that the bulk of money from the DNI fund went to large and established commercial publishers, with only a fraction going to non-commercial and public service media. The rest of the money went to all kinds of other institutions, such as research institutions, but also to individuals. There is nothing inherently bad about the money going mainly to commercial publishers, but I think it gives an important clue to the fact that Google's money is meant to lobby publishers, while deflecting from the fact that Google itself has hoovered up much of the revenue shortfall from digital advertising. Other tech giants have followed Google's example. Facebook started the Facebook Journalism Project in 2019. They promised $300 million in funding for financial grants, training for journalists, and partnerships with publishers. Here you can see a typical success story of the Facebook Journalism Project. A partnership with the BBC News. Google says that through the partnership, the BBC's Instagram account increased its following from 4.4 million to 10 million followers, which for me beggars the question, are they trying to grow your business or trying to grow theirs? Meanwhile, pressure is mounting on the digital giants and their advertising business model. GDPR has raised questions about ad targeting that regulators are still working out. Meanwhile, the EU's copyright directive has created an auxiliary copyright that most EU countries are currently about to implement. In an apparent attempt to forestall this development, Google announced a new product called Google News Showcase. It promises license fees to select publishers to show their stories, including paywalled content in the Google News feed. Here you see an animated GIF of how that would look like. In return, the publishers reportedly have to forfeit claims under the copyrights directive, at least according to industry sources. Last week, French publishers announced an agreement with Google over content licenses, which other countries are likely to follow in some way or the other. We don't know much about what they actually agreed on, especially sums paid out to individual publishers, but I think it's telling that While the French publishers say this is paying for the copyright directive, Google says this is actually paying for Google Showcase. This is the situation we have right now. Let's look briefly at a couple of new initiatives that could help to improve the situation of news publishers. One key idea by the Commission is so far to make the market for digital advertising more fair and thereby give publishers access to more revenue that now goes to the digital platform companies. To achieve this, the EU pursues two interconnected paths, I would say. So one is to take a closer look at big tech's business practices in advertising using existing investigation tools. So in December, the Commission reportedly sent out a questionnaire to advertisers to see if Google and Facebook had unfairly distorted the market. One line of investigation concerns the question if Google has a conflict of interest and is both at the same time intermediary, runs Google ad servers, but it is also a competitor in the online advertising market as it runs, sells display advertising on news media sites, but also at the same time sells advertising on its own ad basis, for instance, search ads. So far, the Commission has reportedly only opened preliminary investigation, but the EU probe pretty much complements similar investigations in other countries, including the US. The more long-term measure that the Commission is proposing is the Digital Services Act, Digital Markets Act proposal. Here, the Commission says that in the Digital Markets Act, it wants to put specific obligations on gatekeeper platforms such as Google and Facebook. These obligations could potentially transform the business relationship with big tech companies. Here you can see Article 5G of the Digital Markets Act, which says that platforms must provide advertisers and publishers with information concerning the price paid by the advertiser and publisher, as well as the amount of remuneration paid to the publisher. This clause and other measures in the DSA DMA are meant to at least bring more transparency into the digital advertising market, which in turn could bring more revenue. Now, I think it's too early on to say whether that this and other measures in the DSA are really effective in the way they are currently envisioned by the Commission, but I think that is a good point for the discussion later on. Another way the Commission wants to help news media is the so-called News Initiative, which was announced alongside the European Democracy Action Plan in December. The News Initiative has three elements. One is liquidity and cash flow needs, which will be addressed through InvestEU in form of credit guarantees. The financial volume is yet unclear, but this is set to start maybe even this year still. Two will be an equity-based pilot program to find investment for media from third parties, including foundations. In theory, this would also be open for Google and Facebook. And three, there will be grants from Creative Europe to finance cross-border collaborations on news production and also news distribution, as well as local journalism in news deserts. The funding volume of 60 million euros was foreseen in earlier plans. It could be more or less. So all of this is set to start this year or maybe next. This was part of the action plan on media and audiovisual services. To conclude, the funding gap for innovation projects in news media in Europe is fairly evident. What I discussed here is the way in which big tech companies, who are seen to be somewhat responsible for that very funding gap, have stepped in to fill innovation needs of media organizations. I've also discussed a few of the current pathways and attempts by the Commission to address this funding gap and the underlying reasons. I hope we can now move to a very interesting discussion on whether the institutional response is sufficient and what further measures are needed. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Alex, for your introduction, which I hope sets the scene as well for the panel that we're now moving into. If you find Alex's work interesting, if you want to read more, Google his name. There's a lot out there online, and I suggest you do that for some further reading. So let's move into the panel now. I will ask the panelists each to do an introduction of about 5 to 7 minutes. I will ask Dace and Melbarde to start, to take the floor, and we'll go then with Christel Schaldemose, Jan Havlík, and Ricardo Castanheira, and then we have our discussion. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I presume I can take the floor now. Okay, yeah, good morning. First, let me thank you for having this timely discussion on the digital service package and its significance for the media sector. We know well that the media have for years been at the forefront of the digital and data revolution, in which the large online platforms are not bound by and don't play by the same rules. What is more, during the COVID-19 crisis, the global online platforms have only further strengthened their positions. Hence, first and foremost, it is essential for all stakeholders to recognize that the digital ecosystem as it stands is failing the media sector. In order to mitigate this market failure and to ensure an economically viable media landscape, it will take both legislation and financial support mechanism. Examining Digital Service Act and Digital Market Act through the lens of the media sector, I believe we should ask a question whether these instruments effectively level the playing field and help to foster media plurality and quality journalism online. Looking at the DMA, I would like to particularly emphasize two of the do's, namely the obligation of gatekeepers to provide access to the data the business users generate, and obligation to share information about advertising, so they can, the business users can analyze and improve their services accordingly. And there are two also don'ts addressed to gatekeepers to be pointed out. The prohibition to use data obtained from their business users to compete with them, and the prohibition of self-preferencing. And I believe that these four points form the very basis to provide having fair competition online. Nevertheless, I would like to share my concerns. It might not be enough to have these rules only for the EU level gatekeepers. As for example, we might have platforms that act as gatekeepers in the information ecosystem only in one member state. Now, jumping to the DSA, from a vast amount of sector relevant rules, let me highlight two aspects here. First, media is a business based on trust, and platforms have played an enormous role in eroding this trust. If before the pandemic we talked about a crisis in trust, now we've been talking about this infodemia, and the DSA puts the responsibility on the shoulders of platforms. I mean, responsibility to combat disinformation. But in my opinion, the structuring of the online information environment, the space where democratic debate takes place nowadays, cannot be left to the global online platforms themselves. As we have seen, this has already led to the widespread dissemination of disinformation and conspiracy theories instead of professional journalistic content. I believe the responsibility to gain or regain and build trust in the information environment should be put on the shoulders of all stakeholders. So moreover, the provisions in DSA on transparency in content moderation, algorithms and advertisements, user complaint and redress mechanisms, enhanced cooperation with trustees, flaggers, notice and action mechanisms and other relevant obligations are steps in the right direction. Then I would also like to mention the European Democracy Action Plan, which refers to the regulatory backstop in the DSA and suggests the introduction of structural remedies by supporting adequate visibility of reliable information of public interest. But I would argue that it is time to acknowledge the importance the online environment plays in shaping information consumption and introduce binding must-carry prominence and findability requirements for trustworthy quality media content for online information gatekeepers. So it should be built on the audiovisual media services directives, share and prominence requirements, and universal service directives rules of the must-carry obligations. So thus, instead of algorithms favoring disinformation and misinformation, quality content would be promoted. This way, we will not only strengthen our democracies, but also but also the economic viability of the media sector. Then to conclude, the DSA provides with the requirement that platforms have to identify significant systemic risks. I would argue that it is clear that they possess a significant systemic risks to the media sector, and in order to mitigate these threats, there is a need for a new deal on media economic viability online. So namely, we should also have a code of practice on media. So, but unfortunately, there is no document outlining something like that. And I think that we could discuss this idea further on, as I have seen this idea appear in several documents of, from organizations working in the sector. Among other things, the code of practice could deal with imbalanced media platform relations resulting from the immense bargaining power the platforms have at the moment. And as we clearly see, that interferes in realizing the fair remuneration objectives of the copyright directive as well. So I'll stop here, but there are indeed many other aspects that deserve other examination and discussion.
Thank you very much, and let me also take the opportunity to thank you and congratulate you on the work you do as Vice Chairman of the Culture Committee in the European Parliament on media-related issues. Moving on to Christel Schaldemose, and a very important player in these discussions, as she was appointed as a rapporteur of the DSA. Christel, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar and to participate in this, what I find a very, very important discussion. So thank you very much for that. Let me try to be as clear as possible. First of all, I do believe that we need strong, independent, and diverse media, clearly. That's extremely important to have a well-functioning democracy. And in these years, I think that the media sector is under a huge pressure for many reasons, for political reasons, for the governments in many countries are trying to push the media into a wrong direction, but also from a funding perspective, the lack of funding is a challenge and is a threat to our media. And I think we politicians need to do something about that. On the other hand, I also think that the platforms are here to stay. They play a huge part of our lives, and they are also a player in the media market. And the citizens, the consumers use them, companies use them, we use them all, politicians use them in order to come out with our messages. So they are here, and even though you sometimes could wish to not have that kind of big tech giant, I still believe that they are here, and we need to cope with that. And therefore, I believe that we as politicians have a responsibility to regulate them, and we haven't done that in a good manner so far. Taking into account the way that they are playing a huge role in our lives and in our societies, we haven't regulated them sufficiently. And therefore, I truly welcome the DMA and DSA proposal from the Commission, but I don't think that they are enough to tackle the challenges we have. So I just wanted to let that be, the starting point for my intervention here. So medias are extremely important for a democracy, and we need to regulate the platforms in order to make sure that the media can play a role and have a chance to survive. So when it comes to DSA, and I'm rapporteur for that, so that will be my main responsibility here. I think that it is crucial that we need to find a balance. On one hand, I think we need to make sure that the liability regime does not go any further than putting up obligations on illegal content. So the platforms must play a role in order to remove illegal content. But on the other hand, I would definitely not wish the platforms to have a kind of an editorial responsibility. So you have a second editorial responsibility. I don't want that at all. So therefore, it is important that we find this delicate balance. And for me, that is very important to find that. For me, I'm from Denmark, and we have seen discussions. We have very good and strong and independent medias in Denmark, public service medias, that has used the big platforms to broaden, to come up to the citizens with their content. And we have seen examples of even child television that Facebook didn't like. We are kind of, very direct, and we have a program in Denmark with a guy who is smoking a pipe, and he's swearing and do a lot of things that American moral doesn't really like towards kids. Of course, parents also need to guide the kids, but we like that in Denmark. We think that it's good that we can have these kind of discussions and show this side of the life. But Facebook didn't like it, so they closed down for that content. And for me, that is very important, that Facebook should not be allowed to close down for this kind of content. I don't want them to be the second editorial. They should not have a secondary editorial responsibility. So they need to take down illegal content, but not play a role in order to emphasize, American morality on EU or on Denmark. So for me, that's important to find this balance here. But when we talk about funding, and that is, of course, the most important thing for our discussion here today, I'm not really sure that the DSA, at least, will be the place to tackle this problem. First of all, I think we tried to find a balance in the copyright directive, and now we see that is, Alexander talked about that as well. We see that is going to be rolled out in the member states, and and we will follow that very closely. But I think what we can do in terms of DSA and DMA is exactly do something about transparency, so that we makes it clearer what is happening, what are the algorithms, what are the consequences of the choices the platforms are taking. That is important for us to make sure that is clear and visible and transparent. But the core problem around funding, I'm not sure that we can solve that, at least not in the DSA, even though I would be happy to help doing something that could help create funding for our media, because without funding, they cannot exist. So if you think and come up with ideas, I think it could be worth discussing it here also when it comes to DSA. But from my perspective, I think it is not inside DSA that we can solve the funding problem. But I am really open to be to learn differently if you think so. Let me conclude, because I think it would be more interesting to have a discussion today amongst also the listeners, that yes, we need trustworthy independent medias. Yes, the platforms, they do play a role in this. They need also to participate in the funding, and I think we need to regulate them so that they are not deciding, but we have democratic regulation. We need to do something about illegal content. Here we can put obligations on the platforms, but a secondary editorial responsibility is not good to put on. However, having said that, then we have all been discussing the Twitter example, Lex Trump. Is it fair or not in a democracy that a president of the United States has closed down, that he got his account closed down from Twitter's side? Well, here I would say it is important for me that it is clear, if you enter into a platform, what kind of rights you have as users. So you need to know under what circumstances you would be closed down if you don't comply with the terms and conditions. It needs to be crystal clear, and that's not crystal clear today, in fact. So I think that it should be clearer, the obligations, the rights of the users, but I also think that you should have a right to complain and be listened to. And that, I don't think we have that clear today. So that is also something I think we should regulate. But deciding when or not to take down a person would have to be up to the platform. But on the other hand, when a platform creates or acts or is a kind of a critical infrastructure in the society, and that is the case for many of the big platforms, they act like a critical infrastructure. You can't search for anything without using Google. It's difficult to be a journalist without being on Twitter in order to check out what happens and be in contact with sources, etc., etc. So, and there are no real alternatives for this. Then I think we should, of course, also be able to put up demands on obligations and rights for these platforms. So yes, to regulation, but also that we need to find a really good balance between illegal content and the fact that we don't want a secondary editorial responsibilities, because that's not good. And the funding, let's see what we can do. I am definitely in favor of doing more in order to help the medias to get funding, but I'm not sure that it is exactly inside DSA that we can solve that. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. Moving on then to Jan Havlík, who works at the Czech Permanent Representation to the European Union, where he is the head of unit for internal market and competitiveness matters. Looking forward to hearing your views, Jan.
Thank you very much, Wout. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning to everyone. Thank you for inviting me to this excellent panel. There is a lot of harmony in this panel. I'm pleasantly surprised. So thank you also for the insightful keynote and the perfect evaluation of the DSA from both MEPs. I have actually very little to add because I really agree with most which has been said already. But I'll try to take a slightly different angle. Also to slightly manage expectations in an egoistic manner of the Czech presidency of the council approaching quite soon. It's also what MEP Schaldemose has mentioned. It's the legal basis for DSA is Article 114, which means developing the single market. So although all the issues which have been so far mentioned at the panel are extremely important for our democracy, for the development of our European society. Not all of them can be solved in the DSA, but just like Madame Schaldemose said, of course, we are ready to discuss this further, and maybe in a different place than DSA, but we definitely need to get a lot of things right also in the DSA to make sure that, because this is a media panel and we have some journalists in the audience, I would try to use the worst cliche I could possibly find, and that's to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We should not do that. I'll come back to this a little bit later. What is worth mentioning is the impact assessment of the Commission. Now I'll be praising the Commission to the heavens, because we think this is a near golden standard impact assessment. It shows you very clearly where the options the Commission could have taken in the DSA. It also shows the research it has done before they came with the text. And so in the end, we feel that the text is very balanced already. So we need to be also very careful what we do, both in the Council, in the Parliament, and then later in trilogue with the text, to make sure that we keep this balance, which has been mentioned also on the panel. Going into the subject of the panel, we believe there is cleansing potential in the DSA in the media sphere, because if online advertising is supposed to be clearly marked, we believe this might take away the power of some of the rogue media platforms, which are basically just paid by whoever to promote their political goals. And I'm not necessarily meaning inside EU funding. I also mean outside of the EU. So we feel there is a cleansing potential in the DSA because the viewer, the reader, will be clearly, or should be clearly informed that this content has been paid for to be put as a news article. What has been mentioned is the role of the platforms they play today. The very large online platforms, I think it's clear, it's been evoked. It was, I believe, the Commission who has informed us that in the year 2018, roughly 80% of the demands for removal of content on Facebook was done by teenagers who were fighting their ex-lovers or future lovers and their friends. So just to illustrate what removal of content can also mean. But I don't mean to talk about this because I think we all know the scene, and it's been clearly evoked also in the keynote. I would maybe shortly concentrate on the smaller platforms. The Czech Republic has the most online platforms per capita. There is, the last time I checked, it was roughly 50,000 platforms in a 10.5 million country. And of course, they have totally different means to deal with the regulation we create. So the way the DSA is created, of course, we all know is putting more and more responsibilities the larger the platform is. We believe that is the right way forward, not to harm a small e-shop with too much regulation, which has zero influence on, for example, the media world. What are the risks? I guess the risks for the media world is Article 14 on notice and action. We believe that there is a risk of misuse of power on the part of the state in several areas. So we absolutely need to get Article 14 right to make sure that we don't remove content which is absolutely illegal and not harmful just because somebody doesn't like it. We also believe there is risk of dismantling the country of origin principle from the e-commerce directive, which would also have influence on the media. What the proposal is saying is basically a court can send a court order to any other member state asking for removal of content. We also believe we need to clarify this really well. And then I would end with what I started with, and that's what we have now. The text of the Commission, which, as I stressed, is based on a robust impact assessment, but we may end up with a totally different text at the end of the legislative process as things are. So I would, if you allow, end with an appeal, and this has been, I mean, perfect in the panel so far. We really need to get the right balance in order to deal with the regulation that we need to introduce, which hasn't been there before, without removing some of the core principles on which the digital market works today. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jan, for your words. Moving on then to Ricardo, I believe one of the most busy men in Brussels at the moment, carrying the Portuguese presidency, at least the digital policy part of that. Well, towards June when that ends. But I think the Portuguese presidency has a very ambitious and a very busy agenda, and so I'm very grateful that you could join us today, Ricardo, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning to everyone, and good afternoon already. I think that everything has been said, but not by everyone. I will try to add something then. I think this panel also reflects the wide consensus among institutions, industry, and civil society on the opportunity and also the relevance of creating a regulatory framework for the digital economy, with a view to making digital platforms accountable in their responsibilities and relationship with the consumers, with other companies, but also on the media field. And we've seen during the last years, and it has been mentioned by MEP Dace, a very, I would say, an holistic approach from the European institutions on this field. And she reminded us some of the most important ones, the Article 15 of the new directive, the new copyright directive, the Audiovisual and Media Services Directive, now with the European Democracy Action Plan, also the Audiovisual and Media Action Plan, which we are preparing some council conclusions, and also, and last but not the least, the Digital Services Package. Just to mention how, I would say, active the Commission, but also the Parliament and the Council, we've been on trying to tackle the problems that are that have been identified with the Keynote, on the Keynote. But as the chair of the negotiation at the Council, I've been asked to focus today especially on the DSA, which has also a very important geopolitical aspect. It's important to note that it will be the first legislation to establish a regime of rules and responsibility for platforms, which we believe will put the EU once again on the regulatory front line with a view to promote a level playing field that is absolutely essential for operators in the DSM, including, of course, media outlets who operate in the digital world. But the regime that at least we expect the DSA will establish will be precisely an alternative to the more relaxed, to say the least, regime of the US Communications Decency Act, but also, on the other side, the total absence of such regime on the obligations on some Asiatic countries. Let me mention some important aspects. Jan, he mentioned some, but let me emphasize some other aspects of the DSA that I think that are really relevant for the media sector too. The country, or the principle of extraterritoriality, then the legislation will apply to any entity that establishes a relationship with European users, regardless of where it is established. This principle, this clause, brings a greater level playing field for European companies that face unfair competition from a lot of operators that do not respect European standards. But there are some other things that it's important to mention. For example, the country of origin principle was also brought from the electronic, the e-commerce directive, However, when we take a look on the logic of combating, for example, illegal content, piracy content, also illegal products online, it's also clear that there is a necessity to give the authorities of the country of destination a greater leeway in order to avoid the slowness of judicial remedies, for example. And this is probably a point of friction during the negotiations. Regarding the due diligence obligations, the Commission has proposed a gradual regime, inserting a kind of scale of obligations depending on the type and the size of the platforms. In this context, it is important to pay attention to three aspects that are very important to the media sector. The definition of online platforms. For the first time, we have a proposal that defines these operators as those intermediary services that host content and disseminate it, which is the concept that we from the copyright we know quite well, communication to the public. And the concept of dissemination here is a fundamental one, because the definition refers to the discussion around the limits of the public and private sphere. DSA recognizes large online platforms as public spaces, which of course justifies the regime of obligations. But within the online platforms, we have now, for the first time, also the concept of very large online platform, which is, as you know, is defined based on the number of users, 45 million users, or 10% of the European population. And this is also, this will be subject of to a series of obligations that may already go beyond the scope of moderating illegal content and tackle, in fact, harmful content. Examples, with audits, with assessment of systemic risks, the transparency rules regarding online recommender and advertising systems. And then it has been mentioned by the previous speakers, online targeted advertising. Nowadays, the business model of the majority of online platforms is based on ads. The system is based on monetizing users' data and selling to advertisers. This has had a great impact on the media sector. And of course, they are losing an important source of funding and are, of course, not able to compete with the digital giants. We believe that the DSA seeks to introduce a greater transparency on how the online ads work, especially the targeted ads, including commercial and political ads. We believe that these provisions, together with the new obligations, the new duty of care obligations, we think that it will bring more balanced framework for the media sector too. And one of the new features included in the DSA has also to do with the privileged role given to trusted flaggers for detecting illegal content. However, this is a new provision that may probably raise some doubts, since it only provides for the status of trusted flaggers. So for some entities, it's quite narrow so far. But it's a very important dimension that we should also have in mind on this discussion. Like MEP Schaldemose said, actually fundamental rights are also a baseline for the DSA. Freedom of expression is a principle included in the DSA regulation. And the intention is not to give platforms the possibility to unilaterally define what is or not admissible in the light of freedom of expression, but instead establish a dialogue between platforms and the public authorities. And moreover, platforms' terms and conditions must be coherent with the Charter of Fundamental Rights. We believe that within the scope of the DSA, the online platforms must communicate in a transparent manner their terms and conditions, according to which they can make removal decisions or about content or users. Platforms will now have to, or when it is approved, explain to the users the reasons why they've decided to remove their content or their account. In addition, they have to implement internal complaint mechanisms, and the possibility of out-of-court conflict resolution is also envisaged. Finally, a question of the enforcement governance, which is absolutely critical. The proposal provides for the establishment of a new figure, of a new entity, the Digital Services Coordinator, a new European body for digital services, as well as some additional powers for the Commission with regard especially to the supervision of the very large platforms online. At this point, we know that there are some doubts that have been already raised from some member states, But we will have time to discuss this. In conclusion, the media sector, we can expect a lot from the discussion on the DSA. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Ricardo. I'd like to remind all the attendees that the chat box is open. So please, if you have any questions following the introductions of the panelists, do not hesitate to put your question in the box. I'll start with Ricardo, because Ricardo, you referred to the country of origin principle, and the Commission proposed to maintain this country of origin principle by putting national regulators basically in the front line of the DSA enforcement. So indeed, this network of digital service coordinators. Drawing on GDPR enforcement experience and its system of lead authority, do we risk maybe to make the DSA unenforceable that way?
Sorry, I was trying to switch on my. Well, we must have in mind that the country of origin principle is, I would say, a very important, one of the three most important principles of the e-commerce directive, and the DSA does not want to change this, because it's also a very, very important principle that has helped all of us to build the internal market. However, what we see when we take a look, for example, on the piracy content rates, also during the last months with the pandemic, the bunch of illegal products that started to become commercialized online, it's clear that we must do something, and we've been hearing more and more from entities, especially from stakeholders, from private sector, the need to give to the authorities of the country of destination some additional capabilities in order to react immediately, but also to avoid the slowness of the judicial remedies. It means that we can, okay, we understand the relevance of the country of origin, but at the same time, there is something that we should do in order to tackle problems that are really, really in front of us, and the figures show how important they are. The question is, this is a very sensitive issue. I just can tell you that probably we will have some friction during the negotiations, because it's clear that some member states have already set a position closer to the needs of probably change somehow the country of origin, but we still do have some other countries that don't want to touch at all in this principle. Well, we as presidency, to be very honest, or we must be a very honest broker. I would prefer so far just to identify the issue and the problem and not go beyond on that, at least till June.
Clear. Okay, thank you very much. I have another question on liability. Christel Schaldemose mentioned this balance on liability, and the idea of introducing a Good Samaritan safe harbor has been controversial and has received mixed views on whether it actually helps to fight illegal content at all. I was wondering if the panelists had a view on that. Ms. Schaldemose herself first, maybe?
Well, first, before I maybe go into that, can I comment on Ricardo's comment on country of origin and country of destination, because that was in my mind, and that was why I was a little slow. Because I agree that this can also be something we have to look into. On the one hand, the country of origin is a very important principle in EU legislation, but on the other hand, we have seen in different kind of legislation in EU that we have taken on board also aspects of country of destination. For instance, when we talk about the labor market and protection of workers, etc. So I think that we will probably have to look into this here in the DSA as well. Seen from my perspective, I think that we have to find maybe a double thing. The principle is country of origin, but on some things we need to have a country of destination. When we talk about culture, for instance, media and culture, and what comes out of that, we have very different ways of looking at this in EU, even inside EU. In some member states, things are illegal to publish, and in others it is not, and how to tackle that. Therefore, it's not enough to have the country of origin principle, but also country of destination if we have to cope with this. So I just want to say that I think we have to discuss this a little further when it comes to not so much the enforcement, for instance. I think that this can be tricky, and personally, I think that we also have to look into whether we should give the Commission more responsibility to help enforcing some of the topics here, at least when it comes to, for instance, products that are not complying with EU regulation. I think here we might have a need also to include the Commission. We have seen that in several legislation lately that we need to have maybe an extra layer when it comes to enforcement, and making sure that the Commission helps in order to make sure that we can comply. So I think we have to work into this. I do support country of origin, don't misunderstand me, but I also think that we need to look into things. So on that, I think that I understand what Ricardo is saying, and then I might agree with him on this. And then I did not answer your question, but maybe you could let others in the panel come in, and then I can come back on the question of the Good Samaritan. Sure.
But can I jump on the?
Of course.
On your question, and very briefly, because it took us a lot of time, and it can also add on top of what I will say, but Article 6 is a very important one. Don't call it Good Samaritan clause, because it's not an European solution, and we are trying to find a different solution and give it an European flavor. And to be very honest, the Commission, they did a good job. I think that we can give more clarity to the wording. Probably it's not exactly, we are not yet there, but the objective is to remove one of the arguments that normally platforms used for the inaction. There are some discussion around, but in Article 6, when we read it, it removes these incentives to proactive and voluntary action by platforms, saying that by acting proactively in detecting illegal content, platforms do not lose the liability exemption. It's also at the same time very important to give clarity to this. But to be based on intellectual honesty, I think that we should avoid to call it Good Samaritan clause, because indeed it is not exactly a Good Samaritan clause. Just my opinion, I would say. But Jan, please.
Jan, go ahead.
Thanks a lot. Now, just to support just what Ricardo said, we see it exactly the same way. One quick word on the country of origin. The way we're reading Articles 8 and 9 is that it gives the court the option in individual cases to ask a platform to look for content which has repeatedly been an illegal content, which has repeatedly been posted uploaded on that platform. So I'm not going any more into the discussion. We would spend a whole day just on the country of origin, but just to say that there is a provision for the court to do that in individual cases. Thank you.
Okay. And I know Dace has switched off her video just to allow some bandwidth to go to her connection. But I will take a question from the floor, actually, because I saw a question from Angela Mills-Wade, who says that many have mentioned the importance of removing illegal content, but the text doesn't include a stay-down rule to accompany the take-down obligation. Do you foresee possibility to include a stay-down provision to help control the spread of illegal content? open to anyone.
I might chip in actually if no one else will. Yeah, I saw the question and I think it's an interesting one. However, the criticism of stay down provisions has always been that the question is what kind of technology do they require? And if they require automated filtering of content, then we're opening up a fundamental rights conundrum, because the question is, do we want to have automated processes policing our content? Can we, kind of delegate precarious questions of respecting freedom of expression and so forth to automated content machines? So this takedown point is I think is highly controversial, and the risk of inserting it into the Digital Services Act is that the Digital Services Act becomes not a tool to regulate platform companies, but it moves into a wider question of policing online content, and I think it could potentially toxify the debate within the Digital Services Act. So therefore, I don't know. So my personal opinion is it's probably smart to keep it out.
Jan, you seem to agree.
Absolutely, thanks. We see it exactly the same way. I was also trying to actually answer this question when I was speaking about the court orders, because at least the Commission in the impact assessment says that not even the best AI today can identify all the illegal content there is, especially when it comes to counterfeit goods. So the ways that the Commission has decided to solve this in the text is by giving the courts the option to oblige the platform to look for a particular user, for example, who repeatedly posts illegal content, to keep an eye on him, but not oblige the platform to keep checking all the time all the content, which is impossible even for the best technology. Thank you.
Christel, would you want to react?
Well, I might move into some of the more sensitive questions here, and I try to say it as clear as possible. Well, first of all, I think when it comes to illegal content, I think it is important when we're talking about products that are not complying with EU regulation and therefore are dangerous. It could be chemical content or toys that don't comply with our regulation, which is one of the best in the world. Then I do think, in fact, that filters or use AI to help finding these illegal products could be important. And I think that maybe we should differentiate between online marketplaces where you sell physical products that will end out in the houses of the consumers, and then content that is about free speech, creativity, and things like that. So maybe we should differentiate here also on the methods of checking whether the platforms are complying or not, because when it comes to freedom of speech, I think I don't want the platforms to decide what is who should say what. But when it comes to products, I think that we need maybe to do more than we're doing today. And I'm not sure that what the Commission has proposed on the online marketplaces are completely enough to tackle that, because I fear that what we see today is an undermining of the high level of product safety we have in EU. So a way to differentiate between in the discussion on illegal content. So when we're talking about products, we could use one kind of tools, and when we talk about freedom of speech and the right to express yourself, then we're talking about something else. That is, I haven't made up my mind yet on how to tackle this, but I think this is something that is not really tackled in a sufficient manner in the proposal from the Commission, and therefore I think we could go more into a discussion of that. So I hope you don't misunderstand me. I will not regulate freedom of speech, but I think we should do more in the area of product safety.
I think, yeah, I think that I absolutely agree with Christel. We could start the trilogues immediately, and then because we have no, it's true, we have a common ground now. And please, it's my personal opinion, okay? It's very difficult to say that, but it's my personal opinion. I absolutely agree with the distinction that Christel just made, which is absolutely important. One thing is a product that we know that is fake. That's sometimes, for example, on pharma, we are talking about public safety. It's very, very important. And it's obvious that it's a fake one. It's absolutely distinct. It's different than an opinion or than an op-ed, whatever that is in a social media or in a blog, whatever. It's different. And this kind of distinction must be done, and which probably it is not yet. That's why that discussion, we cannot avoid the discussion, at least. And that's why I absolutely agree with the approach from Christel. And just to add one important aspect that the proposal comes with, which is the know your business customer principle. It's a very important one on this aspect too. And the problem is not the principle itself, which is absolutely positive. The question is, as for example, MEP Alex Saliba raised in his report, which is probably it's still too narrow, the article so far, because it's just focused on marketplaces, online intermediaries, and probably we should go beyond that. You know, this is a discussion, but we cannot avoid the discussion for sure.
Okay, thank you. Dace, I have a question for you, because you had a very strong message on media trust and responsibility in the online space. So how do you react to what other panelists have mentioned?
I don't know whether it's reaction, but I would say that it's quite clear that trust and media literacy are connected, and I believe that reliable news sources and quality journalism, as well as critical thinking citizens, are the strongest antidote to the disinformation that we have. One of the objectives of the DSA is to empower users by providing various mechanisms, information, and choices. And this all comes at a time when 42% of the EU citizens lack basic digital skills. I believe that in order to truly empower citizens, we need both effective digital tools and skills to use them. What we see that there is already established obligation to promote media literacy skills in Audiovisual Media Service Directive. According to which, also video sharing platforms have an obligation to set up effective media literacy measures and tools. I would like to suggest to introduce in the DSA similar obligations for the online platforms, namely obligation to promote media literacy skills as well as digital, algorithmic, and data literacy skills.
Okay. Thank you. Dace, you also suggested this code of practice to rebalance the relations between media and tech companies. Could you expand a bit on that? Are you referring to what has been done in Australia, for instance, right now?
Yeah, but what we see that DCA and DMA don't directly address imbalanced bargaining power issues, where, for example, in discussions related to copyright directive and remuneration, Google speaks with the publishers one by one, and publishers are forbidden to coordinate. Thus, small publishers as little Davids are fighting Goliath alone. And I think this is a proof that we need a truly new deal on the media pluralism online. I just put it as an idea, and I myself will work on the own initiative report on media action plan. So I hope that we could develop this idea, and I'm very open to suggestions coming from the sector.
Okay, thank you, Jan. Based on what Dace just said, would there be a place perhaps in the DMA for such an initiative?
I'm afraid I really don't know. The way we see DMA is it's Thor's hammer of the Commission to strike on the very large online platforms on the basis of the competition rules. This is our sort of primary view, but I'm afraid I really don't know the answer to that question. I'm happy to look into this further, but not for the moment.
All right, Christel, yes, please.
But it is a tricky thing, because what I use the word infrastructure for some of the big platforms. I think Ricardo said public spaces or something like that. But I mean, what I think is that we need to find a way where Google cannot threaten by closing off their services just because you have an infight on who has to pay what. And as long as we have almost monopoly for many of these big platforms, then we need to find ways that they cannot interfere in the way our society functions by just closing off, for their service in a certain area. If we can tackle that in DMA, I hope, but I'm not really sure. I definitely think it's difficult to tackle it in the DSA, because I don't think we have the tools there either. But as a politician in EU, I think we need to find tools to tackle this, because we cannot accept platforms that are so big that they can close down societies. They can, I mean, if we can't use Google in Europe because they don't want to pay, then we have a big problem. So we need to tackle that. So, but I just wanted to say, I think it is a problem. I think we need to do something. DSA is probably not the tool. Maybe DMA is, I'm not sure either, but we need to tackle it some way or the other, because we cannot accept these big platforms play such a role and act in a way that we have seen Google at least threaten to do.
Okay, thank you. Alexander, would you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I wanted to comment on what Christel said. I think the idea is interesting and appealing to say Google is kind of a basic infrastructure provider which we must force to provide services. But at the other hand side, I'm wondering if we shouldn't also address the myth of indispensability around that these platforms have created. Like, there is no other email provider such as Gmail. There is no other search engine. I'm not sure that it's true. And I think that if Google is threatening now to leave Australia because they won't pay they won't pay license fees or whatever to news media, then we should ask the question: can we do without them? And if you look at the vibrancy, the vibrant sphere of new emerging search engines that are challenging Google's dominance, I think we should give that a thought, and should also consider whether we shouldn't allow companies like that to leave Europe if they want, if they feel they cannot comply with European regulation. And I think we'd be better off without them in a way. It's my controversial opinion, I guess.
Well, Dace seems to agree. Dace?
Yeah, actually, it's very, very provoking statement, but it's quite clear that we can't leave it like it is. That there is a monopoly over information space, and actually the new legal instruments have to really find a way how to promote competition in this area.
Yeah, I agree. What we see, for instance, in Australia, that Google is fighting this news bargaining code, And so I was happy to read that Microsoft in their Bing service actually agree with the Australian route, and they've actually expressed their support for this system. Jan, I believe you wanted to say something.
Just a short reaction without absolutely any ideology in this. I mean, we have islands in the EU which record this. In the Czech Republic, we have a platform which is a competitor to Google, and they use roughly always 50% of the space since, I don't know, since 13 years. So, you know, this is already happening. So it is possible.
Ricardo?
Considering that we are getting to the end, I would like to emphasize the audiovisual and media action plan, which we did not discuss in detail, but also invite the audience and the stakeholders to come to us and with some thoughts, with proposals, because as I've mentioned in my first intervention, it is subject of council conclusions. We are preparing council conclusions on that. And it's a very, very important and a very comprehensive plan with 10 concrete measures. We believe that it tries to show some ways for the audiovisual and especially for the media sector to monetize its content, explore the diversification of financing sources with long-term sustainability options, which also include some public-private partnerships, which is very interesting too, and also the need of more and more adopt new technologies in the media sector, which is also very, very, very important. I think that, sorry, that the media action plan somehow give us some answers for some of the questions that I saw in the chat, and some of the issues that we've already all raised during our conversation. Of course, the DSA is not for sure the unique or the most important solution for all the problems that the media and audiovisual sectors have in Europe. But just to emphasize that there is a very important plan that came up last December, and the stakeholders should take a look on it.
Okay, thank you. And indeed, I would like to ask the panelists to take a minute for some final thoughts. Perhaps I can ask Dace to start.
Yeah, thank you. My final remarks will concern financing, because I saw in chat there were questions raised in this regard towards European Union and its institutions. I think that it is very important that to ensure economic viability of media sector, we have direct financial instruments also at the EU level. I know there is a debate even among the media themselves whether there is a need for direct financial instrument. I believe we need the direct financial instrument, dedicated funding for news media sector. Thanks to possibility to increase Creative Europe program, we will have more stable media sub-program to fund media projects, but I believe it's not enough. We have to continue working on this dedicated funding for news media sector. But then of course there is question where to take money for that. Actually, I'm truly looking forward to the European Commission's pilot projects in this regard, and I believe that it's a right way to build partnerships with the private sector on the very clear regulations here, and this fund should be based on arm's length principle. And then we didn't discuss also an issue on future digital tax, because I believe that it is also should be a source for funding coming to support media sector. And I think that in that way we can avoid this conflict of interest, and gatekeepers using the power of money and they financed partners to promote their needs. So I would say that I invite to continue discussions on these funding mechanisms, and they should be diverse. And I think it is very important that we have access to digital transformation programs, because all media sector is really in a need to have investments in digital transformations.
Thank you very much, Dace, and also thank you very much for suggesting future topics for possible webinars that we could run. Christel, your final words, please.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me to this webinar and for our good discussion here. We have just begun the work on the DSA, and I'm still open for ideas and suggestions in order to how we can tackle it. Let me start by saying that we need strong, independent, trustworthy media in Europe, definitely, and we need to find ways to have that. And seen from my perspective, one of the ways to tackle or to reach that is also to dare to regulate the tech giants. We need to do so. We also need to do it in a good manner, as we have been discussing. But I'm really definitely in favor of regulating the platforms, so we have a better chance to create more fairness and more competition. And yes, we also need to look into other search engines and Google, etc. But honestly, I think that if we close down Google today in Europe, we would definitely have a problem, unfortunately. I think we also need to work into finding ways to create interoperability between the platforms, so people have a chance to use different platforms when they search and when they buy, etc., etc. So for me, it's important to have strong media, need to have fairness, need to regulate, and some of the things we can do inside DSA, and I'm happy to participate in that. And for the general building up good medias and finding fundings for the media, we need to do more. The Commission has come up with something. The member states has clearly a responsibility in this as well. But definitely, we have seen in the United States where we end if we don't have trustworthy independent medias. So definitely for a democracy, we need to have that. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Jan, your final thoughts.
Thank you. First of all, thank you again for inviting me. I'd just like to flag the Creative Europe program, where also there are opportunities that I think are worth mentioning in this field. But to sum up, I think the key is communication, the communication with the stakeholders to tell us really how things really are in the online world, and then for the co-legislators to make the right policy choices in order to get mainly Article 8 and 9 and 14 of the DSA right, in order to also preserve our core values. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Ricardo?
Yeah, I would say time. We don't have time. Next week, we will try to finalize e-privacy. We've started more than 4 years ago. We took 3 years on copyright. We took 3 years on AVMSD. We cannot take 3 years on DSA. And especially the media sector knows that they cannot stay 3 years waiting for us to tackle these issues and to get a new legal framework. That's why time is very important. Thanks.
Ricardo, thank you very much indeed. And thank you very much to our panelists. I'd like to ask Alex to wrap it all up in the next couple of minutes that are left. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I think it was a very interesting panel. I think we had a broad kind of scope of discussion. I mean, we mainly addressed points on the DSA DMA proposals, but we also talked about the Democracy Action Plan, and at least touched upon the action plan for media and audiovisual sector that I also mentioned in my talk. What I think is very clear that there are still very big open questions on important points in the DSA, the Commission proposal of the DSA. We have heard different views on key points, such as the country of origin principle. We touched upon the question of enforcement, Good Samaritan clause with a European flavor, as I think Ricardo coined it, as well as controversial questions such as stay down notices. I think we had certain points of agreement up to the point of starting the trilogue right away, as I think also Ricardo suggested. Dace said that there is an element of market failure in regards to digital platforms, and Christel Schaldemose said that we have a responsibility to regulate. But as Jan pointed out, the DSA can't solve everything. Yeah, and I think we have a few open points in regards to, especially to advertising. Regulating digital advertising is one key thing that the DSA and DMA shall do. I think there needs to be further discussion on how this will look exactly, whether some of the transparency requirements that we talked about are going far enough. And I also really liked the last point that Dace made about, that's my personal opinion now, about addressing the funding shortfall for things like media literacy, and also kind of generally addressing the funding shortfall that media face at the moment for their digital transformation. Yeah, I think a lot of key points addressed, and I hope we can continue this discussion in one form or another in the near future.
Thank you very much, Alex. And with that, it is exactly 1 o'clock on my watch. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you very much again to all the panelists. Thank you very much to Alex for his keynote and the wrap up. And we will publish a short video of highlights on our website in the coming days. If anything, please feel free to reach out to my colleagues or myself on anything DSA, DMA, or broader media-related issues. I'd like to thank both Aurore and Jakob for their amazing work in putting this all together. And with that, I wish you a very nice day and thanks for joining. Thank you. Goodbye.